My therapist asked one strange question. And it exposed my entire marriage. If you think your relationship is fine, let me tell you what happened to me. 3 months ago, I started therapy. Not because my marriage was bad, but because I felt off. My husband, Daniel, is the kind of guy everyone loves. Charming, calm, supportive in public. The type who remembers birthdays and brings flowers to dinner parties. People used to say, "You're so lucky, he's perfect." And honestly, I believe that. But at home, something felt different. Nothing dramatic. No screaming. No cheating, at least, none that I knew of. Just small things. If I cried, he'd sigh. If I was stressed, he'd say, "You're overthinking." If I tried to talk about my feelings, he'd somehow turn it into how tired he was. Every single time. I started wondering if I was just too sensitive. So I booked therapy. At first, I told my therapist how lucky I was. How stable my marriage was. How Daniel never yells, never hits, never cheats. She listened quietly. Then one day, she asked me one question. She said, "When was the last time you felt emotionally safe with him?" I laughed. I said, "What do you mean? He's my husband, of course I feel safe." She didn't argue. She just waited. And suddenly, I couldn't answer. Not last week. Not last month. Not even last year. I couldn't remember the last time I cried in front of him and felt comforted instead of dismissed. The last time I expressed anger without him saying I was dramatic. The last time I disagreed without apologizing first. My therapist leaned forward and said something I will never forget. Emotional safety isn't the absence of violence, it's a presence of acceptance. And my chest tightened. Because in that moment, I realized something terrifying. I had been shrinking myself for years. Daniel never told me not to speak. I just learned that if I did, it cost me affection. If I disagreed, he'd go quiet for hours. If I pushed an issue, he'd say, "I guess I'm just a terrible husband then." And suddenly I'd be the one apologizing. Every single time. It was so subtle I never noticed. Until that question. That night, I decided to test something. Nothing dramatic. Just small honesty. I told him I didn't like how he joked about my weight in front of friends. He smiled and said, "Oh my god, you're still on that." It was a joke. I didn't laugh this time. I said, "It didn't feel like a joke to me." He went quiet. Not angry. Just cold. Then he said, "So now I'm the bad guy for having a sense of humor." And there it was. The shift. The guilt. The subtle punishment. That night he slept facing away from me. The next day he barely spoke. No yelling. No explosion. Just distance. And I realized something. I was terrified of that silence. More terrified of his silence than I ever was of conflict. Because his silence meant I had done something wrong. And I would do anything to fix it. Including abandoning myself. At my next therapy session, I told her everything. She asked me another question. If your best friend described this relationship to you, what would you tell her? I didn't hesitate. I'd tell her she deserved better. That love shouldn't feel like walking on eggshells. That disagreement shouldn't feel like punishment. That silence shouldn't feel like exile. And then I started crying. Because I finally saw it. Daniel didn't need to scream to control the room. He just needed me to fear losing his approval. 3 weeks later, I asked for trial separation. Not because he cheated. Not because he hit me. But because I realized I hadn't felt emotionally safe in years. You know what he said? "This is coming out of nowhere." And that was the final confirmation. Because it wasn't out of nowhere. It had been building in silence for years. And the scariest part. From the outside, we looked perfect. No one would have believed me. Even I didn't believe me. Until one strange question exposed everything. So if you're watching this and thinking, "Well, at least he doesn't yell." Or, "At least she doesn't cheat." Ask yourself this instead. When was the last time you felt emotionally safe? Because sometimes the most damaging relationships are the quietest ones.